Texas, mid-1944. The sun bore down on the plains with a relentless heat, painting the horizon gold and making the barbed wire of Camp Hearne shimmer like glass. The wind stirred only in whispers, carrying dust that clung to bare skin and dried lips. Wooden guard towers cast long, thin shadows across the corral, and the faint scent of hay mixed with leather, sweat, and the acrid tang of horses. Along the fence line, a group of German women stood in the blistering sun, uniforms patched and faded from months of work in the sewing units. Their hair, pulled back tightly, reflected streaks of sweat. Eyes narrowed against the glare, they shifted from foot to foot, hands gripping fence posts as if to anchor themselves to reality. Each carried the weight of a war that had uprooted families, destroyed cities, and rewritten lives. In their minds, America had been a distant enemy, a place of fear, stories of cruelty, and warnings whispered on leaflets dropped from Allied planes. But today the air carried something different. From the fields beyond the camp, a cloud of dust approached. Hooves clattered against dry earth. 3 figures emerged on horseback, silhouettes framed by the blazing sun. Cowboys, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a calm authority that seemed inseparable from the land itself. Their hats shaded sunburned faces. Leather chaps creaked with every movement. They were Texans first, soldiers second, and for the prisoners, the embodiment of myths whispered across the Atlantic. Americans as free, fearless, untamed. One man dismounted with an effortless grace. Tom Baker, 25, from Yano County, his hands roughened by work, eyes scanning the group with a quiet intensity. He approached slowly, deliberately, observing the tension, the disbelief. He stopped a few feet from a young prisoner, her gaze downcast, the outline of a small horse sketched on cardboard clutched in her fingers. She had never been offered trust, never been seen as more than a captive. The corral held its breath. Even the horses paused, nostrils flaring, ears twitching. The guards, sunburned and skeptical, exchanged uncertain glances. Time stretched, measured by the harsh sway of heat in the air, the rhythm of distant hooves, and the faint hum of cicadas. Then, without ceremony, Tom extended his hand. His voice was low, calm, steady. "Ever been on a horse before?" For a moment, the prisoner froze, uncertainty battling instinctive fear. Around them, whispers floated in German. A camp captain emerged from his office, shielding his eyes against the sun. Yet Tom did not flinch. He gestured toward the open corral. The horse shifted under his gaze, muscles coiling like springs, yet responsive to the calm authority in his stance. The moment hung suspended, charged with possibility. Not just a question, not just a ride, but a choice. Freedom, even in small measure, presented itself under the Texas sky. And for the women hardened by months of dislocation, uncertainty, and propaganda, it was unthinkable, yet undeniable. That afternoon, dust, sunlight, and the sound of hooves would carry more than a simple ride. They carried the first whispers of trust, courage, and a fragile, human connection that no war could entirely erase. By mid-1944, the world was in the grip of total war. Across Europe, cities had been reduced to rubble, supply lines were strained, and the German military machine was faltering on multiple fronts. In Italy, Allied advances had pushed Axis forces northward, capturing towns and cities that had once been strongholds. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of German air power, was reduced to fragments, its personnel pulled from front lines or reassigned to administrative duties far from the combat zones. Among these were women clerks, typists, and medics, officially non-combatants, yet fully enmeshed in the machinery of a collapsing empire. Captured during the Allied advance, many of these women faced uncertain fates. Stories circulated about the Allies, some told of mercy, others of harsh treatment. Propaganda had taught them to fear Americans, to expect cruelty, starvation, and humiliation. Yet the reality was often different. The United States, under the Geneva Convention, had established protocols for humane treatment of prisoners. By 1944, nearly 500,000 Axis POWs were held across more than 500 camps in the U.S., with Texas alone housing over 70,000. These camps were designed not for vengeance but for efficiency, organized layouts, strict hierarchies, and clear adherence to international law. Officers had separate quarters, medical care was mandated, abuse was forbidden. Camp Hearne, located in the heart of Texas, was a product of this system. Surrounded by vast ranch lands, rolling fields, and the seemingly endless sky of the American plains, it offered both security and unexpected freedom. Escape was nearly impossible. The flat terrain made it easy to spot anyone trying to flee, but within the fences, life could carry the illusion of autonomy. Barracks were arranged in neat rows, kitchens smelled of fresh bread each morning, and stables held horses tended with care. For many POWs, the camp resembled a small frontier town more than a prison. The camp's commander, Major William R. Walker, believed firmly in discipline tempered with dignity. "If we treat them like beasts, we create beasts," he instructed his officers. "But if we treat them like humans, they will act like it." Guards were often young Texans drafted from local ranches, accustomed to horses and open land. They brought a culture of courtesy and fairness rooted less in ideology and more in daily life on ranches and farms. Stetsons replaced helmets. Laughter occasionally punctuated the heat of work. For the German women, this environment was alien. Their previous world had been structured by fear, propaganda, and the ever-present threat of violence. Arrival in Camp Hearne, escorted through train yards, past waving children, and onto the dry, sun-scorched earth of Texas, was almost surreal. No snarling dogs, no barking orders, just fences, stables, and men tipping their hats politely. Some women whispered to each other, questioning whether this was a trap. Others simply clung to a quiet disbelief. Yet beneath it all, there was a growing sense that survival here required more than physical endurance. It demanded psychological adaptation, a recalibration of expectations, and the cautious testing of trust. The broader strategic picture also framed this experience. The United States was preparing for major offensives in Europe. The Normandy landings were on the horizon, and the Red Army pressed from the east. Prisoner management was not just ethical, it was pragmatic. Content prisoners required fewer guards, produced less disruption, and in some cases contributed labor to support the war effort. Women in sewing units repaired uniforms and processed administrative work, providing an essential yet humane contribution. Even within this regulated system, human dynamics created unpredictability. Guards noticed prisoners' hesitancy, their flinches at raised voices, their habit of watching from the corners of rooms or behind fences. Diaries show that German women were acutely aware of being watched, measured, and evaluated. Every small act, an exchange of words, a shared glance, a tolerated mistake, carried amplified significance. These interactions were the first cracks in the wall of fear built by months of indoctrination and chaos. It was within this precise intersection of history, geography, and human psychology that the extraordinary events of Camp Hearne would unfold. The wide-open Texas plains, the organized discipline of a POW camp, the culturally rooted fairness of young Texan guards, all set the stage for a seemingly simple, yet profoundly transformative act, teaching the women to ride wild Mustangs. In the still heat of the summer, the camp became a testing ground for trust, courage, and the enduring power of human connection. And as the afternoon sun reached its zenith, the quiet tension of Camp Hearne foreshadowed the moment when life and freedom would briefly intersect in ways neither captor nor captive had anticipated. The story of Camp Hearne in Texas is not one of battlefields or bombs. It is a convergence of humans, cultures, and circumstances that created unexpected moments of grace. To understand it fully, we must examine the situation from multiple angles: the prisoner's perspective, the guard's reality, the tactical logic of American POW policy, and the moral weight carried by every decision within the camp. For the German women, the journey to Camp Hearne had been long and disorienting. Many were pulled from offices, hospitals, and supply depots across Italy and southern Germany. Lisa Lauterbauer, like others, had grown accustomed to fear as a constant companion. Each day of capture layered anxiety over exhaustion. Memories of family, homes, and cities, flattened by Allied bombings, haunted their dreams. Crossing the Atlantic on crowded ships brought cold, storms, and seasickness, yet officers distributed blankets, food, and, occasionally, cigarettes. Even minor gestures, like a sailor draping a coat over a shivering prisoner, became etched in memory. Once in Texas, initial days were marked by silence. The women whispered cautiously among themselves, testing language, tone, and intent. Some drew sketches of horses, barns, or distant fences, capturing the physical freedom of the land they could only observe from behind wire. Writing in diaries became a quiet rebellion against fear, a reclaiming of identity. Every smile from a guard, every polite greeting, carried weight, challenging decades of propaganda that had taught them to see Americans as monsters. On the other side, young Texan guards had been plucked from farms and ranches, suddenly wearing uniforms in a military system governed by rules and inspections. Yet their instincts remained shaped by ranch life, a respect for animals, for labor, and for fairness. They observed the prisoners with curiosity rather than contempt, noting the subtle shifts in behavior that followed small kindnesses. Tom Baker, one of the ranch guards, recognized this before most. When he saw a young woman sketching a horse, his response was instinctive. He knew the animal's temperament, understood the subtle cues of fear and trust, and saw in her hands a longing for freedom. For him, offering a ride was not heroic. It was an extension of the world he knew, where teaching someone to ride was teaching confidence, balance, and calm. Every gesture, no matter how small, carried immense significance in a place designed for control. From the military standpoint, the design of camps like Hearne followed clear principles. POWs needed to be contained efficiently, escapes had to be virtually impossible. Texas offered wide, open landscapes, natural surveillance, and minimal population density. Within the camp, rules were strict. Officers had separate quarters, medical care was mandatory, and abuse prohibited. Labor was assigned according to ability. Some women repaired uniforms, others worked in kitchens or fields. Each task was monitored, yet designed to maintain morale and order. This approach was pragmatic. Content prisoners required fewer guards, disrupted operations less frequently, and in many cases, contributed to the war effort indirectly. Yet it also created an environment where human interaction could flourish. The open design, combined with fair treatment, allowed moments of spontaneity, like horseback rides, that could never occur in a more traditional prison setting. The psychological impact of these interactions was profound. For prisoners, small gestures dismantled the mental walls built by propaganda. A horse's snort, a gentle guiding hand, a shared laugh, each cracked layers of fear, mistrust, and indoctrination. In letters and diaries, prisoners described the experience as disorienting and transformative, a moment when captivity and freedom overlapped. For the guards, engaging humanely with captives required a moral choice. Military rules were clear, but enforcement depended on judgment. When Tom lifted a prisoner onto a horse, he risked censure, yet he acted in alignment with his ethical understanding of decency. His decision illustrates the tension between regulation and conscience, between military order and human empathy. The moral weight extended beyond the individual. The camp itself became a living experiment in reconciliation, showing that humane treatment could preserve order while transforming relationships. Small acts, greetings, shared work, or riding horses together, softened resentment, built trust, and in some cases, reshaped identities. Guards came to see prisoners as people, not enemies. Prisoners began to see Americans as humans, not monsters. The Texas environment contributed in subtle ways. The vast plains, open skies, and ranch traditions created a backdrop of freedom unfamiliar to European prisoners. Horses, central to Texan life, became symbols of power, trust, and grace. Riding was not merely a pastime. It was an education in control, confidence, and connection with nature. For women who had only known control through fear or hierarchy, these experiences became radical acts of personal liberation. Meanwhile, American guards, shaped by local culture, approached captivity differently from European counterparts. Politeness, humor, and casual conversation were as much part of maintaining order as regulations. These cultural norms, often invisible, proved more transformative than direct commands or punishments. It was a sweltering Sunday afternoon in mid-1944. The Texas sun hung high over Camp Hearne, turning the corrals and fences to heat waves rising off the dust. Guards brushed horses, patched fences, and idled in the shade, while German women watched from behind wooden barriers. The air was still, heavy with anticipation. Tom Baker, 25, a ranch-born guard, adjusted his Stetson, glancing at a bay gelding named Whiskey, known among the men for his stubbornness. He had been training the horse all morning, testing its reactions and temperament. Behind the fence, Lisa Lauterbauer sketched quietly, capturing the lines of the horse in motion on a piece of cardboard. The strokes were precise, controlled, like her life since capture. A makeshift rodeo had been arranged, a simple display of horsemanship for the prisoners. Guards and women gathered along the fence line, a sparse crowd in the blazing heat. Tom mounted Whiskey with a practiced ease, the gelding snorting and pawing the dirt. The gate swung open. Dust rose like smoke. Tom guided Whiskey through a series of controlled trots and circles, demonstrating speed, balance, and patience. From the shadows of the fence, Lisa's gaze never left the horse. Her pencil hovered, capturing every tense muscle, every ripple of movement. A guard nudged another. "Watch her. She's watching more than the horse." She had, unknowingly, been preparing herself for a moment that would defy the logic of captivity. When the ride concluded, a hush fell over the camp. The guards exchanged glances. The prisoners leaned forward, a mix of fear and fascination. Tom dismounted, holding the reins loosely, and walked toward the fence. His eyes met Lisa's. She froze, unsure if she should look, should speak, should breathe. "Ever been in a saddle?" he asked quietly, voice steady against the ambient hum of insects and horses. Lisa shook her head, almost imperceptibly. The camp captain, standing nearby with clipboard in hand, tensed. Regulations forbade unnecessary interaction between guards and prisoners. But the moment had passed beyond policy. Without hesitation, Tom extended his hand. She hesitated, a single heartbeat stretched to infinity. Then, with cautious trust, she placed her hand in his. He guided her, lifting her with practiced strength, onto Whiskey's broad back. Her breath caught. The horse snorted, stamping the dirt, yet she was steady, gripping the saddle horn, heart hammering. For a few seconds, time itself paused. The prisoners gasped softly. The guards froze, uncertain if discipline would erupt. The heat of Texas, the scent of hay and dust, the hum of cicadas, everything faded into a single, suspended moment of human connection. Tom led Whiskey in a slow circle within the corral. His hand rested lightly against her waist, ensuring balance, offering safety without force. Lisa's initial fear melted into a strange exhilaration. The sensation of motion, the animal's energy beneath her, and the gentle guidance of a stranger defied all she had known about captivity. When the ride ended, Tom lowered the reins, helping her dismount with care. A single tear traced a line down her dusty cheek. She had not been harmed. She had not been humiliated. She had been trusted, guided, and momentarily freed. Major Walker, observing quietly, exhaled and muttered, "Well, hell, so long as she didn't fall." There was no reprimand, no scolding, only the acknowledgement that something profound had occurred. the camp itself seemed transformed. Invisible walls that had separated captors from captives thinned. Guards tipped their hats with renewed respect. The women returned greetings with newfound confidence. A quiet shift, almost imperceptible, began to ripple through the barracks. Dignity, trust, and a fragile camaraderie had entered the camp. In diaries, the women recorded the moment with reverence. For 10 seconds, Lisa wrote, I remembered I was human. Others noted small changes. A smile returned, a posture straightened, laughter breaking through the usual silence. The act of trust, a simple ride on a horse, had undone years of fear, propaganda, and isolation in a single gesture. From a tactical standpoint, nothing had changed. Whiskey still needed care. Barbed wire still enclosed the camp. Yet from a human perspective, the balance of power shifted. The prisoners recognized the guards' humanity. The guards acknowledged the prisoners' resilience. It was a turning point not of strategy or combat, but of morality and understanding, a quiet revolution inside the camp. This was the day when captivity became less about control and more about connection, when a cowboy's instinct and a horse's trust combined to reshape hearts. It was a turning point that no battle report would capture, yet its impact would be remembered long after the war ended. The afternoon faded, shadows stretching across the corral, hinting at evening. And as the sun sank lower, the camp held a rare stillness, pregnant with anticipation for what this fragile trust would yield in the days to come. The days following that afternoon in the corral carried a subtle, unspoken transformation. The German women, once hesitant and withdrawn, began to move with steadier steps. They walked among the barracks with heads lifted, their eyes meeting those of the guards without flinching. Letters and diaries from the time record how small gestures, greetings returned, an apple left on a workbench, or a simple nod, became threads of trust weaving a fragile new order within Camp Hearne. Guards noticed it immediately. Tasks that had once been carried out under strict observation now required less enforcement. The sewing units hummed with quiet conversation. The kitchen rang with laughter over minor mistakes in preparation. Officers noted in reports that morale among female prisoners had improved significantly, though none dared to describe the catalyst. Discipline incidents remained negligible, work efficiency subtly rose. Even Major Walker remarked in his journal that human behavior, under the right conditions, could be guided more effectively by respect than by fear. Prisoners began to engage with the land. Those assigned to the fields learned to handle tools not just for labor but with a sense of pride in their work. Horseback riding became more than a spectacle. A few women, following Tom Baker's informal lessons, began learning to ride independently, discovering a connection with the animals that transcended language, nationality, or the boundaries of captivity. Riding became an act of quiet defiance against the fear that had ruled their lives since capture, a tangible taste of freedom in an otherwise confined world. Cultural exchange unfolded organically. Guards shared songs, stories, and food, introducing folk traditions that were foreign yet warmly received. In return, prisoners offered sketches, embroidered handkerchiefs, and occasional attempts at German lullabies. Letters intercepted by censors hinted at mutual respect growing steadily, as prisoners wrote of Americans not as enemies, but as humans with values, humor, and kindness. The war, though raging thousands of miles away, felt momentarily distant, reduced to its logistics rather than its cruelty. From a broader strategic perspective, the United States policies regarding POW treatment proved remarkably effective. By adhering strictly to the Geneva Convention, while allowing for humane, culturally informed interaction, the camps avoided unrest, escapes, and sabotage. Camp Hearne's design, emphasizing efficiency, discipline, and controlled freedoms, created conditions where trust could develop organically. Historians later noted that camps like Hearne, with disciplined yet humane policies, fostered compliance and cooperation far better than harsher regimes in Europe. Psychologically, the effect was profound. For the women, moments like horseback rides became anchors of identity and hope. They were no longer simply prisoners. They were people capable of learning, teaching, and connecting. Guards, in turn, recognized the limits of authority when exercised without empathy. Several young men from rural Texas would later recall how these weeks shaped their understanding of fairness, leadership, and human dignity, lessons that stayed with them long after the war. Even simple acts, like sharing a meal or passing a folded newspaper, carried weight. Records indicate that the camp chaplain began noting these interactions as part of his weekly reports, highlighting the restoration of morale and the evidence of human kindness as essential to maintaining order. The camp, once a site of strict hierarchy and silent tension, became a space where both captives and captors adapted to a rhythm of mutual acknowledgement and respect. News of Camp Hearne's humane approach, though censored in official channels, spread informally. Families in Texas heard of the German women learning to ride, of cowboys guiding them through pastures. Red Cross representatives filed notes on prisoner morale. Photographs of smiling prisoners and guards quietly circulated among aid organizations, demonstrating that humane treatment could coexist with containment. By the end of 1944, a subtle equilibrium had settled over Camp Hearne. Work, recreation, and daily life continued under the watchful eyes of the military, but within this framework, human connection flourished. The lessons of the corral, the trust extended by Tom Baker, the courage of Lisa Latta, and the patience of the horses, became the silent blueprint for daily interaction. In diaries, sketches, and letters, these moments were recorded not as anomalies, but as transformative experiences, marking a turning point where captivity no longer meant the erasure of humanity. The ripple effects extended even to routine discipline. Guards approached confrontations with restraint, officers reconsidered strict enforcement of minor infractions, and prisoners, emboldened by trust, engaged responsibly with their assignments. The camp's daily rhythm reflected this balance. Mornings were for work, afternoons for training and chores, evenings for reflection, music, and sketching. Human dignity, once considered a luxury in a war camp, became a practical tool for maintaining peace. As winter approached, the Texas sun softened over the prairie, casting long shadows across barracks and pastures. Horses shifted restlessly in their stalls. The air carried the scent of hay and cedar, faintly mingled with smoke from the kitchens. German prisoners, once fearful, now found themselves walking into open spaces without hesitation, sometimes pausing to observe the horizon or the horses in the corral. The guards, too, carried a quiet awareness that the camp was no longer solely a place of confinement. It had become a space where humanity endured against the backdrop of global conflict. The stage was now set for reflection. The moment in the corral had irrevocably changed the dynamic between prisoners and guards, leaving an imprint far deeper than policy manuals or military orders could convey. From here, the narrative moves toward closure, revealing what Camp Hearne's experiment in trust and kindness ultimately meant for those who lived it. Years later, historians would examine Camp Hearne not for battles fought or strategies deployed, but for a quieter, more elusive victory, the restoration of humanity amidst the machinery of war. The story of German women learning to ride wild Mustangs, guided by Texas cowboys, transcended regulations, hierarchies, and fear. It was proof that human connection, even in captivity, could alter hearts and minds more profoundly than orders or propaganda ever could. The war raged on elsewhere, a maelstrom of destruction and strategy, but inside the fenced fields of Camp Hearne, small gestures, an extended hand, a shared smile, the rhythm of hooves against dirt, became acts of resistance against the erosion of dignity. Prisoners and guards alike discovered that respect, curiosity, and kindness were not weaknesses. They were tools, capable of creating trust where suspicion had once ruled. For the German women, riding those horses was more than learning a skill. It was reclamation, of freedom, of identity, of agency. Each ride, each lesson, reinforced the truth that captivity need not strip a person of their humanity. Their diaries, sketches, and letters preserved these moments with reverence, capturing not just the movement of horses, but the quiet revolution of hearts. For the guards, particularly young Texans like Tom Baker, the experience left an indelible mark. It was a lesson in leadership without force, in the power of empathy over authority. Years later, many would recall how a simple choice, to guide rather than command, to trust rather than intimidate, had reshaped their understanding of duty. In the vastness of the American heartland, under a blazing sun or a sky full of stars, they learned that courage was not always in conflict, but in compassion. The camp's legacy extended beyond the fences. Reports, photographs, and oral histories documented a truth that often goes unrecorded in military annals, that humane treatment of prisoners produced measurable results, not only in order and efficiency, but in moral integrity. Scholars noted that camps like Hearne demonstrated a blueprint for controlled freedom, showing that even in wartime, respect for human dignity could be preserved and rewarded. In the broader sweep of history, these moments were small, 10 seconds in the corral, a ride across a pasture, but their impact rippled across the lives of those who experienced them. The war eventually ended, Europe lay in ruins, and countless lives were lost. Yet, within Camp Hearne, the enduring memory was not of bombs or surrender, but of a cowboy lifting a woman onto a horse, of a prisoner learning to ride with trust, and of the invisible threads of decency weaving a fragile, lasting peace. Sometimes, history's greatest victories do not roar. They whisper, quietly, in the dust of a Texas corral, in the hum of cicadas, and in the diaries of women who remembered freedom not as a right reclaimed, but as a moment granted. The fences that once separated captor and captive were still there, yet they seemed less formidable. The war outside remained fierce, but inside the camp, humanity had prevailed. And in that quiet triumph, Camp Hearne's story offers a lesson as timeless as it is profound, that even in the darkest chapters of conflict, compassion can endure, trust can flourish, and the simplest acts, a hand extended, a horse guided, a moment of understanding, can transform the world, one heart at a time.